Hi, these are the most interesting historical photos that I could find. Let's go. American soldiers, filled with anticipation, board a British landing craft for the Normandy invasion on D-Day 1944. The tension of the moment is visible as they prepare for one of the most significant battles in history. Inmates of the Mauthausen concentration camp, Upper Austria, 1944, march under the shadow of Nazi oppression. The horror of their suffering is evident as they endure forced labor during one of history's darkest periods. Jews prepare matzah in the Łódź ghetto, 1943, amid the horrors of Nazi oppression. Their resilience in the face of suffering is captured in this poignant moment of survival. The damage to a Jewish-owned store in Magdeburg, Germany, during Kristallnacht on November 9th to 10th, 1938, is visible in this haunting image. The night of shattered glass marked a brutal turning point in the persecution of Jews under Nazi rule. The aftermath of the 1992 bombing on Via D'Amelio, orchestrated by the Sicilian Mafia, is captured in this powerful image. Judge Paolo Borsellino and 5 of his bodyguards lost their lives in the brutal attack aimed at silencing the fight against organized crime. The aftermath of the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre is shown, with the once thriving Greenwood district reduced to ruins. Hundreds of black residents were left homeless after a violent white mob destroyed their homes and businesses. A Palestinian woman pleads with Christian militias in Beirut during the Lebanese Civil War in January 1976. The haunting image captured by Françoise de Mulder shows the desperation of civilians amidst the chaos of a burning city. The blood-stained shirt worn by President John F. Kennedy on the day of his assassination in Dallas, Texas, on November 22, 1963. This chilling piece of history serves as a stark reminder of the tragic moment that shook the nation. B-17. Flying fortresses from the 491st Bomb Group, 8th Air Force, soar through intense flak over Europe in 1944. The skies are filled with tracer rounds as these bombers continue their deadly mission. President Nixon greets astronauts Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins after their successful Apollo 11 mission in 1969. The historic moment marks the return of the first humans to land on the moon, celebrated with a warm embrace. Serbian women dance on the wreckage of a downed F-117 stealth fighter in 1999 after it was shot down during the Kosovo War. The incident led to a famous propaganda poster mocking the invisibility of the aircraft. The Literina Armata Libli, an armored train used by Axis forces for anti-partisan operations in occupied Yugoslavia during 1942 to 1943. Its unique design featured multiple turrets, making it a formidable but rare tool of warfare. Director Billy Wilder embraces Marilyn Monroe between shots on the set of The 7-Year Itch in 1954. The iconic Kodachrome image captures a light-hearted moment during the making of one of Monroe's most famous films. Robert Oppenheimer and Manhattan Project officials inspect the remnants of the Trinity test site after the first successful nuclear explosion in 1945. The barren landscape bears the scars of one of history's most pivotal and destructive moments. A man places Italian fascist propaganda stickers proclaiming W il Duce, W Hitler, on a shop window in Milan, 1940. The image reflects the deep collaboration between Mussolini's Italy and Nazi Germany during World War II. President Ronald Reagan waves to the crowd just moments before the assassination attempt on March 30, 1981. Despite being shot, Reagan survived and made a full recovery after the attack by John Hinckley, Jr. In 1945, a U.S. submarine rescues the crew of a downed PBY aircraft stranded at sea. The image captures the life-saving moment during World War II, highlighting the bravery of both the airmen and the submarine crew. A military ship is being disassembled at the boat graveyard in Baltiysk, Kaliningrad region, Russia. The rusting remains of the once mighty vessel stand as a symbol of the end of its service. Rear Admiral Bradley A. Fisk showcases his 1926 invention, the pocket-sized reading machine. It magnifies microscopic text, offering a new way to read reference materials while minimizing eye strain and eliminating bulky books. A young couple orders food at Tiny Naylor's Drive-In restaurant in Los Angeles, California, 1951. The classic scene captures the popular post-war drive-in dining experience. A Vietnamese soldier emerges from a tunnel in 1966, highlighting the extensive use of underground networks during the Vietnam War. The image captures the ingenuity and resilience of soldiers in the face of overwhelming odds. Iron Mike Tyson enjoys a game of Mike Tyson's Punch-Out! In this iconic promotional photo from 1987. The image blends the worlds of boxing and gaming, capturing a unique moment in pop culture. U.S. Marine Private Kenneth R. Hager carries a flamethrower pack adorned with a pin-up-style illustration while off Iwo Jima in February 1945. The image captures a personal touch amid the intense combat of World War II. The Soviet submarine K-314 damaged after a collision with the USS Kitty Hawk aircraft carrier on March 21, 1984, in the Sea of Japan. The incident reveals the severity of naval accidents during the Cold War. On March 30, 1958, Marilyn Monroe participated in a publicity event to promote arthritis awareness and fundraising for the Arthritis and Rheumatism Foundation. Her involvement was part of her ongoing support for charitable causes. In 1943, a Catalina seaplane picks up a sick sailor from a U.S. submarine in the open sea. The photo captures a moment of coordination and rescue during World War II. A set of ancient Roman surgical instruments discovered during excavations in Pompeii. The tools provide insight into medical practices in the Roman Empire, showcasing their advanced approach to surgery. The Blue Peacock Project, a 1950s British defense initiative, proposed burying nuclear landmines under northern Germany to deter a Russian invasion. One of the more bizarre suggestions was to use live chickens inside the devices to regulate temperature. USAAF armorers prepare a B-25 Mitchell bomber for a mission over Japan on June 30, 1945. This marked the first B-25 raid on the Japanese mainland since the Doolittle raid in April 1942. Passengers in the 1930s used oxygen masks on a flight above 10,000 feet, a common practice before fully pressurized cabins became standard. The image captures a unique moment of early aviation, highlighting the challenges of high-altitude travel. Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser takes photos of his wife on the beach in the 1960s. The intimate moment captures a rare, personal glimpse into the life of a prominent world leader. During the Romanian Revolution in December 1989, a portrait of Nicolae Ceausescu is thrown out of a town hall window in Odorhaiu Secuiesc. The image symbolizes the fall of Ceausescu's regime amid widespread protests. A group of 1940s Bobby Soxers, likely fans of Frank Sinatra, are pictured here. The term Bobby Soxers refers to teenage girls who were passionate fans of swing and big band music during the era. In 1990, people climbed a lighting tower in South Korea to watch a professional baseball game after being unable to secure tickets. The image shows a crowd attempting to catch a glimpse of the game from a precarious vantage point. The Lockheed F-5E-2LO Sky Queen Miss Dean of the 33rd Photo Reconnaissance Squadron in Belgium, 1945. The aircraft features a nose art of a pinup girl and was used during World War II for reconnaissance missions. Circus performer Irmgard Meyer is suspended over Spitalna Street in Warsaw, occupied Poland, 1942. The photo captures a moment of entertainment during a time of hardship under Nazi occupation. Russian socialist Vladimir Lenin is pictured with his cat in 1921. The image offers a rare, personal glimpse into the life of the Soviet leader during a tumultuous period in Russian history. Gavrilo Princip's assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in 1914 triggered Austria-Hungary's declaration of war on Serbia. This event set off a chain reaction, leading to the outbreak of World War I. Over 800 stray dogs now live around Chernobyl, more than 40 years after the nuclear disaster. These dogs have adapted to survive the radiation, pollution, and chemicals in the environment, showcasing remarkable resilience. Paul Newman and Robert Redford play ping pong during a break while filming Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid in 1968. The relaxed moment captures the camaraderie between the two iconic actors. A coffee stand from 1933 offers coffee for 1 penny to the poor, run by the St. Andrew's Hospital 1-cent Coffee Stand Society. Established before the Great Depression, it provided food and coffee to the indigent, including full meals on Thanksgiving. People walk through the aftermath of the Tiananmen Square protests in 1989. The image captures the destruction and chaos following the Chinese government's violent crackdown on the demonstrators. The aftermath of the attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, showing the heavily damaged ships. The image captures the destruction that led to the United States' entry into World War II. A penguin stands at attention next to a British soldier after the Falklands War. The image captures a surreal and lighthearted moment amidst the post-war recovery. An aerial photograph of the Auschwitz-Birkenau concentration camp taken by an Allied reconnaissance plane in 1944. The image shows the scale and structure of the infamous Nazi death camp. German soldiers, battle-worn, returned from close combat with Soviet forces in Ukraine, 1943. The exhaustion and tension of war are visible in their faces. Prisoners at the BMW concentration camp in Munich, 1943, forced to work on shoe production for the German war effort. The inmates were subjected to brutal conditions, with many being exploited for their labor in factories linked to the war machine. Japanese-American farmers worked the fields at the Tule Lake Relocation Center in Newell, California, in 1942. Tule Lake became the largest camp in the United States system that held Japanese Americans after they were removed from their homes during the World War II. A woman photographer in a white dress stands on a raised wooden platform with a large camera in 1922 while people walk below. Photos like this are rare because women were still uncommon in professional news photography in the early 1920s. Women in formal dress and bowler hats ride white horses at the front of a city parade, while more mounted riders follow behind. Mounted suffrage parades in the early 1900s were built to grab attention fast. Jessie Tarbox Beals captured this night parade for women's voting rights in New York around 1913 to 1917, with marchers carrying torches and signs through the dark streets. Night photography was very hard in the early 1910s. Before television made him famous, Ed McMahon joined the United States Marines in 1941 and served as a pilot. He later flew 85 missions in Korea, received 6 air medals, and retired in 1966 as a Marine colonel. This street in Sofia was photographed after the heaviest Allied air raid on the Bulgarian capital on March 30, 1944. That attack damaged wide parts of the city and became one of the darkest days in Sofia's World War II history. In Shadeland, Indiana, in 1937, a farmer's wife pours coffee while neighbors eat lunch after helping the family move. During the Great Depression, shared labor like this helped many farm families handle heavy work without paying for extra hands. Crewmen of German submarine U-564 eat dinner inside a compartment so cramped that bunks, pipes, and machinery filled almost every inch of space. Fresh water was tightly rationed, daily life ran in extreme crowding, and the boat was lost on June 14, 1943, with only 18 crewmen surviving. Workers stacked British-made papier-mâché drop tanks, simple paper fuel tanks that carried about 75 gallons for American fighter planes. Fitted to Mustang fighters, they gave escorts enough range to reach deep into Germany, and about 13,000 of these throwaway tanks were made. A crashed rocket towers over onlookers in the Quatermass Experiment, a BBC science fiction serial first broadcast in 1953. The story starts when Britain's first crewed spaceflight returns with only one of its 3 astronauts still inside. Men line up outside the Union rescue mission for a free Thanksgiving dinner and emergency aid. Photos like this became common during the Great Depression, when rescue missions in American cities fed large crowds of unemployed people. British troops and officers take tea inside Gwalior railway station in the central provinces of colonial India in 1919. The crowded dining hall and long ceiling fans show how major railway stations also worked as military rest points across British India. Women quilt inside a sharecropper's home in Pace, Mississippi in 1939, while a small child watches beside the table. In poor farm households across the rural South, quilts were often made from saved fabric scraps. Colonel Ryoichi Tozuka sits during his 1947 trial in Manila, where he was accused over the 1943 killings on Panay Island that included 17 American Baptist missionaries. The victims later became widely known as the Hopevale Martyrs. 12 men and 1 dog pose on the porch of the Sweetwater Saloon in Sweetwater, Texas, in 1893. The long sign above them advertises both retail beer and ladies' goods, a striking detail from a fast-growing Texas town in the late 19th century. Airline stewardess applicants check their weight, a key hiring rule in the early days of passenger air travel. Early candidates had to be trained nurses, unmarried, under 25, shorter than 5 feet 4 inches, and under 115 pounds. A Soviet soldier stands in the ruins of Stalingrad in 1943 after months of fighting that reduced much of the city to rubble. The battle became a major turning point on the Eastern Front and ended with the collapse of Germany's Sixth Army. Soviet artillery crews set up field guns in the ruined streets of Berlin in 1945 during the final Soviet push into the German capital. The Battle of Berlin ended just days before Germany's surrender and became the last major campaign in Europe in World War II. A Red Cross medical train car stands in Nadworna, East Galicia, in June 1916, used to move injured soldiers and medical staff near the World War I front. These rolling hospitals carried patients, beds, doctors, and supplies by rail. Civilians walk past ruined buildings in Berlin after the Royal Air Force night raid of March 30th to 31st, 1944, one of the heaviest late-war attacks on the city. About 469 British aircraft hit rail yards, factories, and transport hubs that night, leaving whole streets in rubble. Apollo 17, Commander Gene Cernan waves as the crew leaves the suiting room before the 1972 mission that became the last human landing on the moon. Cernan and Harrison Schmitt spent about 75 hours on the lunar surface, and no person has returned there since. A mine rescue team poses in Ernest, Indiana County in the 1940s, wearing helmets and breathing gear for underground emergencies. Teams like this were trained to enter smoke, gas, and cave-in zones where other miners could not safely go. A Soviet T-34 stands in Berlin in 1945, covered with extra metal plates and sandbags, a field modification used during brutal street fighting. Crews added this kind of improvised armor because city battles exposed tanks to hidden threats from windows, doorways, and cellars. Mourners in civilian clothes and service uniforms stand at the graveside during the funeral of schoolchildren lost in wartime air raids. Images like this showed that bombing in Britain reached far beyond military targets. Downtown Reno is flooded during the New Year's flood of 1997 after the Truckee River burst over its banks. Warm winter storms and fast snowmelt in the Sierra turned the river into one of western Nevada's most damaging flood events. A woman stands in the doorway of a rough shack in Manchester, North Carolina, in 1941, where she lived with her husband, a worker at Fort Bragg. As the base expanded before the United States entered World War II, a knocked-out Soviet IS-2 heavy tank of the 87th Guards, Heavy Tank Regiment stands in the shattered streets of Breslau in 1945. The siege of Breslau lasted for months, and even one of the Red Army's most powerful tanks could be left wrecked in the close. Floodwater covers a company area at Cantho Airfield during monsoon season in 1968, surrounding curved barracks huts and wooden buildings. In the Mekong Delta, seasonal rains could flood air bases so badly that roads and living areas turned into waterways. Women workers at a Clyde shipyard in 1917 show how World War I pushed thousands of women into heavy industry as men served overseas. On the River Clyde, women took on shipbuilding, engineering, and fitting work that helped keep naval. An Iranian soldier during the 1980 to 1988 war carries an M3 grease gun, an American submachine gun first made in World War II. By the 1980s, this design was already decades old, so the photo shows how older foreign weapons still appeared in that conflict. In 1963, Heinz Meixner drove this low Austin Healey under the barrier at Checkpoint Charlie after removing the windshield. The car slipped through with almost no clearance, making it one of the Cold War's most unusual border-crossing photos. Actress Myrna Loy rows a canoe down a flooded Los Angeles street in 1926 after heavy rain turned roads into waterways. Before modern flood control changed the city, Los Angeles could flood so badly that even major streets looked like canals. A single shoe lies on the ground after the Century City anti-war protest in Los Angeles on June 24, 1967. Around 10,000 people gathered to protest President Lyndon Johnson's visit to the Century Plaza Hotel. Doctors, nurses, and a sister work in the operating room of Los Angeles Infirmary in 1908. The hospital stood on 6.5 acres at Sunset Boulevard and Boudry Avenue, showing how fast major medical centers were already growing in early Los Angeles. For the 1981 LP Cuckoo, H.R. Geiger, the artist behind Alien's creature design, brought his biomechanical style into pop music with full-body painting and surreal props. The result became one of the most unusual album visuals of the early 1980s. In Rome in 1966, paparazzo Rino Barilari is caught mid-shot as actress Sonia Romanoff smears ice cream across his face after an unflattering photo. Barilari later became known as the king of the paparazzi. At Studio 54 around 1978, a tuxedoed guest in a huge jeweled feather headdress stands beside a costumed figure in a Roman-style helmet. A tiny abandoned house sits alone on the flat prairie in Haskell County, Kansas, in 1897, almost lost against the horizon. The photo turns one small homestead into a speck, showing how isolated life on the Great Plains could be. A Lango man in Uganda is photographed in about 1937, with his pointed, filed front teeth shown in close detail. The image records a real body modification tradition, making the portrait a rare visual record of local custom from that time. A performer born without arms learns to shape blown glass with her feet beside two professional glass blowers at a carnival booth. She later played guitar with her feet and performed at the 1939 New York World's Fair. Sergeant Reckless was a Mongolian mare who served with the 1st Marine Division during the Korean War and became one of the most famous animals in United States military history. At Outpost Vegas in 1953, she made 51 supply trips in a single day and carried nearly 5 tons of ammunition. Field hospital nurses pose in France on August 12, 1944, after reaching the war zone through England and Egypt, following 3 years of service. Their route shows how military medical staff could be moved across several theaters before ending up near the front in Europe. Grozny in 1999 shows whole blocks reduced to ruins during the fighting in Chechnya. By the end of the war, the city had suffered such extreme damage that it was widely described as one of the most devastated urban landscapes on Earth. On March 29, 1926, Roald Amundsen and Lincoln Ellsworth prepared the airship Norge for a transpolar flight from Spitsbergen to Alaska. Weeks later, Norge became the first verified aircraft to fly across the Arctic over the North Pole. On March 27, 1926, people in Toronto gather by a sap house and tank wagon during maple syrup season. Maple syrup can be made only during a short spring window when warm days and freezing nights make the sap run. On March 27, 1926, vaudeville performer Haji Ali demonstrates his famous swallow and return act outside the Egyptian legation. He became one of the oddest stage stars of the 1920s by swallowing water and small objects. George Vezina poses in Montreal Canadiens gear in 1926, the year the great goaltender passed away at 39 after 18 seasons. His name still lives on through the Vezina Trophy, awarded every year to the best goalie in the National Hockey League. Two schoolboys stand in a rubble lot in the Bronx in the 1970s, surrounded by stripped cars and the shells of damaged buildings. In that decade, parts of the South Bronx lost whole blocks to fires, abandonment, and demolition. Miss World contestants visit a wounded Vietnam veteran in 1972 alongside entertainer Bob Hope during one of the era's morale tours. The group included future television star Linda Carter, years before she became famous on screen. In 1977, Soviet dissident Alexander Podrobinik is led away after authorities targeted him for exposing how psychiatry was used against political critics in the USSR. He later became widely known for punitive medicine. A woman of the Ouled Nail tribe in Algeria is photographed in the 1910s wearing layered white cloth, heavy bracelets, and traditional jewelry. Ouled Nail women were widely known for rich dress and silver ornaments. Berliners pose in 1913 beside a snow sculpture of Queen Wilhelmina, Princess Juliana, and a small dog. The photo shows how famous royal figures even appeared in everyday winter street scenes in Berlin before World War I. A Soviet IS-2 heavy tank of the 62nd Guards Heavy Tank Regiment moves through Danzig in late March 1945 with a DSHKM 1938 heavy machine gun mounted on the turret. That roof gun gave the IS-2 extra reach above street level. A young Chamorro boy grips a crucifix while being taken to a civilian internment camp on Saipan in July 1944. The photo shows how the invasion pulled local families, including many children, into mass detention as United States forces took control of the island. The Great Toronto Fire of 1904 left block after block of downtown reduced to empty walls, chimneys, and ash. The blaze destroyed a huge business district in one night and became one of the worst urban fires in Toronto history. The Anti-Fascist United Front Congress in Berlin on July 10, 1932, gathered 1,465 delegates from across Germany under giant banners and hammer and sickle symbols. It took place only months before Hitler took power. German troops in Thessaloniki reused Jewish gravestones as building material for trenches and bunkers in 1944. During the occupation, the city's old Jewish cemetery was destroyed, and thousands of grave markers were taken for roads, walls, and military positions. After his bomber went down off Rostock on April 11, 1944, your father and his crew were photographed during capture while their aircraft still floated in the water nearby. He had reached his 56th mission before spending 13 months in Stalag 17B. In 1916, Sisters Augusta and Adeline Van Buren rode more than 4,000 miles from New York to California to prove women could handle military dispatch work, becoming the first women to cross the United States on solo motorcycles. An undated log cabin in Harlan County, Kentucky, shows a hand-built Appalachian home with a porch, dirt yard, and laundry hanging outside. Harlan later became one of America's most famous coal counties, but many families there long lived in simple timber cabins like this. Butte, Montana, around 1909, was called the richest hill on Earth because its mines produced huge amounts of copper, silver, and other metals that powered America's industrial rise. Singer Jenny Rivera poses inside her private jet with her team only hours before the 2012 flight near Monterey. The image later became widely known as one of the last photos taken before the aircraft was lost. At Longueval in France during World War I, an Australian driver gives his horse a drink at an Australian Comforts Fund stall, while other soldiers wait for their own drinks. The photo captures a sharp detail of frontline life. This image shows a wedding reception in Jerusalem just moments before the dance floor gave way and dropped guests 2 stories down. The 2001 Versailles Hall collapse injured hundreds and became one of the most shocking building disasters in modern Israeli history. While we're looking at these photos, don't forget to write in the comments, which historical shot did you like the most, and for what reason? During World War I, the carrier pigeon Cher Ami delivered a message even after suffering severe injuries in flight. That single mission helped save 194 trapped American soldiers and made Cher Ami one of the most famous animals of the war. In this hospital room, injured Nick Coises points from his bed at James Morelli, the man he said was responsible in the case involving his brother. The image freezes a direct identification scene, turning a plain bedside meeting into a key moment of the investigation. Vivian Thomas helped develop the heart operation, later known as the Blaylock-Thomas-Taussig shunt, and trained many surgeons at Johns Hopkins despite having no medical degree. For years, he was officially treated and paid like a janitor or lab worker. One of the last known photos of Rustem Vladimirovich Slobodin shows him standing in deep snow during the 1959 Dyatlov Pass expedition. Days later, the group's sudden end turned this image into one of the most chilling before the unknown photos in history. A 1903 Sakhalin portrait was circulated with the striking label "Female Strangler," making it one of the strangest captions attached to a Russian Far East photo. The strongest clear facts are the date, the place, and the rare archival title. During the 1978 Buckingham Palace visit of Romania's ruling couple, palace staff reportedly cleared valuables from the guest rooms because they feared items could disappear. The grave of Florence Irene Ford in Natchez City Cemetery in Mississippi was built with steps leading down beside the burial chamber and a small viewing window. That rare design made it one of the most unusual cemetery monuments in the American South. Seattle performer Shelley Ballman later used settlement money from a stage confetti cannon accident to open a bar called Shelley's Leg. The club became one of the best-known early gay nightlife spots in Seattle and fixed her name in the city's history. Segregationist protesters in Louisiana in 1960 carry a coffin with a doll to intimidate a 6-year-old black child entering an all-white school. The image captures how school integration in the United States faced open public hatred even when the student was only a first grader. Many television laugh tracks were assembled from audience recordings made decades ago, including material collected in the 1950s. So some canned laughter heard today may come from people from that era who are no longer alive. This is the last known photo linked to climber Janet Johnson during a 1973 Aconcagua expedition in the Andes. The film was recovered from her camera when it was found on the mountain in 2020, turning one old frame into a rare clue from a mystery that lasted nearly 50 years. In wartime Britain, ration books controlled basics like tea, sugar, meat, and butter, so food could be shared across the country. Despite shortages, rationing made diets more equal, and Britain saw lower infant mortality and longer average life during the war years. Relatives support the grandfather of child actress Renee Shin-Yi Chen during her funeral after the 1982 Twilight Zone movie set accident. The photo became one of the most haunting images linked to the case. After Marcel Petiot was exposed in wartime France, he hid behind the name Henri Valery, grew a beard, joined the French forces, and even became a captain. In one of the strangest twists of the case, NASA Flight Director Jay Green reacts in mission control as Challenger broke apart 73 seconds after liftoff on January 28, 1986. The disaster unfolded live on television and instantly became one of the most unforgettable moments in spaceflight history. In 1959, French writer Ivan Chichaglov was reportedly arrested over a bizarre plan involving the Eiffel Tower after claiming its light kept shining into his attic room at night. During a 1991 Boy Scout trip in California, this blurred close-up became the last image linked to 12-year-old Jared Michael Negrete. His camera and backpack were later found, turning this single frame into the final known clue from the case. During World War II, 29 Navajo Marines created a code for the United States Marine Corps based on the Navajo language. It sent messages far faster than standard methods and remained unbroken throughout the war. Australian Prime Minister Harold Holt is seen shortly before he vanished while swimming at Cheviot Beach in 1967. One of the largest search operations in Australian history found no trace of him, turning his disappearance into one of the country's biggest political mysteries. Civil War veterans play poker in 1930, more than 65 years after the war that reshaped the United States. By then, most surviving veterans were already in their 80s and 90s, which makes photos like this a rare late glimpse of living Civil War history. In 1950, 22-year-old Corporal Leonard Hayworth was photographed in Korea with a tear on his cheek after his unit ran out of ammunition and most of his men were gone. In 1926, Ford Motor Company adopted a 5-day, 40-hour workweek for many factory workers without cutting their weekly pay. The move helped turn the weekend into a mass habit and gave workers more time to spend the money earned in America's new consumer economy. Los Alamos scientists handled test equipment during the Trinity period in 1945 as the Manhattan Project prepared for the first atomic test in history. Two men in this group, Harry Daghlian and Louis Slotin. Bulgarian soldiers eat field rations inside a trench on the Macedonia front in 1917, with rifles lined along the parapet above them. The Macedonia front was one of World War I's less famous battle zones, where men spent long periods living, eating. These improvised World War I gas masks covered the face with cloth and goggles, showing how fast people had to adapt to gas attacks. Early versions were crude, hot, and hard to breathe through, but they were often the only protection available. Thousands moved through deep snow during Vladimir Lenin's funeral procession in 1924, turning Moscow into a vast winter state ceremony. His body was later placed in the mausoleum on Red Square. Joseph Avery, the sole survivor of a boat wreck on the Niagara River in New York, clings to a log in freezing water as rescuers try to reach him from shore. The photo became famous for showing one man alone in the winter current, with nothing but a piece of wreckage keeping him alive. On Australia Day in 1966, the three Beaumont children vanished from Glenelg Beach in South Australia after a normal summer outing. The case never reached a clear answer and became one of Australia's most famous unsolved mysteries. A test house in Nevada is torn apart during a United States atomic test as cameras record what the shockwave does to walls, roofs, and rooms. In the 1950s, full mock neighborhoods were built in the desert for scenes like this. In 1894, sisters Virginia Woolf and Vanessa Bell play cricket at Talland House. Years before, both became central figures of Britain's Bloomsbury Group. Virginia later became one of the most important writers in English, while Vanessa became a major painter and designer. Amelia Earhart and navigator Fred Noonan are pictured shortly before the 1937 flight that was meant to circle the globe. On July 2, 1937, their plane vanished over the Pacific near Howland Island, turning the mission into one of history's most famous unsolved mysteries. The Nemi ships were giant Roman vessels built for Emperor Caligula on Lake Nemi in the 1st century, with marble, plumbing, and decorated floors that made them more like floating palaces than normal boats. Their remains were raised in the 1930s and later destroyed in a fire during World War II. A baseball game continues as Mount St. Helens sends a huge ash cloud into the sky on May 18, 1980. That eruption became the deadliest and most destructive volcanic event in modern United States history. The West Point class of 1915 was later called the class the Stars fell on because 59 of its 164 cadets became generals. It included Dwight Eisenhower and Omar Bradley, making it one of the most extraordinary Academy classes in United States history. On January 8, 1945, Corporal Charles S. McNulty of Cedar Rapids, Iowa, kneels before a small altar in Belgium before rejoining his division near Humont during the Battle of the Bulge. His rifle stays on his back as he prays inside a snow-covered shrine. When Germany surrendered in 1945, huge crowds packed the streets of London to celebrate the end of the war in Europe. Princess Elizabeth and her sister quietly slipped out of Buckingham Palace to join the crowd. This test house stood 7,500 feet from the blast point, showing what an atomic test could do to a normal American-style home. Even at that distance, the upper walls were ripped open and the building was left as a stripped shell in the desert. After Buchenwald was liberated in 1945, local German civilians were marched through the camp so they could see what had existed just miles from their homes. This line became one of the starkest images of how ordinary people were forced to confront the reality of the camp. Japanese General Hisao Tani is pictured in 1947 after being held responsible for crimes tied to the Nanjing events of 1937. The image captures the final act of a case connected to one of the darkest chapters of the war in China. Prisoners at Buchenwald stand under guard in April 1945, only days before liberation. On April 8th, a secret radio message from inside the camp reached the United States Third Army, and the camp was freed 3 days later. In 1913, 10-year-old Sarah Rector received 160 acres in Oklahoma that white officials had considered poor land. Oil was later found on it, and she became one of the first black child millionaires in the United States. During the 1973 energy crisis, President Richard Nixon rode a regular United Airlines flight instead of Air Force One on a trip from Washington to California. It is widely described as the only known time a sitting United States president traveled on a normal commercial airliner. An unknown Bosnian soldier, photographed by Giles Perez around 1995, leans against a tree after returning to his village during the Bosnian War. The rifle still hanging from his hand makes the image one of the conflict's most striking records of personal loss. In January 1943, Hermann Göring ordered faster deportations of Jewish people, and scenes like this show families forced onto transport routes with only the bags in their hands. In many cases, a single suitcase held everything that was left of an entire life. In April 1929, New York postal workers displayed a dangerous parcel addressed to Governor Franklin D. Roosevelt after it was found at the city's main post office. The shocking twist is that the man who found it later admitted he had placed it there himself because he hoped the discovery would earn him a promotion. In November 1938, Kristallnacht left Jewish shops shattered and synagogues burning as Nazi leaders drove the attack across Germany and Austria. These images capture the chilling moment when discrimination turned into open state persecution in full public view. In 1893, streets in New York could look like this because thousands of horses filled the roads with deep manure and mud. The real shock is that many people feared cities would be buried in horse waste by 1950 if transport did not change. On April 1, 1946, a tsunami struck Hawaii after many people dismissed the tidal warning as an April Fool's joke. The wave took 159 lives and caused $26 million in damage in just minutes. This photo shows Pan Am Flight 1736 behind a KLM Boeing 747 at Tenerife Airport in 1977, just minutes before the two planes met on the runway. It became the last calm image before the deadliest crash in aviation history, with 583 lives lost. After the 1923 Great Kanto earthquake, Tokyo streets filled with smoke and fire as the city collapsed into chaos. One of the most shocking facts is that a huge fire whirl during the disaster killed tens of thousands of people in one area alone. This photo was taken moments before the 1947 Texas City disaster, while crews still worked beside the ship with no sign of what was coming. It became one of the last calm images before the deadliest industrial accident in United States history. In 1915, drought-hit San Diego hired rainmaker Charles Hatfield, who climbed a strange wooden tower and claimed he could pull rain from the sky. Weeks later, huge storms flooded the region, destroyed a dam, and the city refused to pay him, saying the rain was an act of God. In Sussex in 1940, 2 German airmen who parachuted from a downed Heinkel, He-111, are marched away by the Home Guard while their bomber burns in the background. It captures a rare Battle of Britain moment when enemy flyers survived the fall but landed straight into capture. After a bomb hit Highbury buildings near Cosham Railway gates on December 12, 1940, whole rooms were ripped open and left hanging above the street. The blast turned an ordinary Portsmouth block into ruins in seconds, and 2 local people, separated by deportation in 1941, this husband and wife were reunited in Haifa in 1946 after 5 years apart. One photograph holds the exact second a lost life suddenly became real again. At 100 years old, Miss Bannister stepped forward to cut the first sod for Havant War Memorial Hospital, marking the start of the building. The striking detail is that she was also the daughter of a well-known local doctor. In 1963, Buddhist monk Thich Quang Duc sat in calm silence during a protest in Saigon that stunned the world. This image became one of the strongest symbols of resistance to religious persecution in the 20th century. Titanic carried 20 lifeboats, enough for only about half the people on board, because many at the time believed ships on busy Atlantic routes would always have help nearby. The chilling fact is that this shortage was not seen as a serious flaw before the voyage. In August 1944, fighters in the Warsaw Uprising moved through wrecked ground with improvised gear as they tried to hold the city. The stunning fact is that the revolt lasted 63 days against overwhelming odds and left Warsaw almost erased. In 1910, workers building County Hall in London uncovered a Roman boat buried deep in the Thames mud for about 1,700 years. The stunning part is that under a modern city project, the river was still hiding a ship from Roman London. After the Great Chicago Fire began on October 8, 1871, huge parts of the city turned into open ruins in just 2 days. About 100,000 people were left without homes, and Chicago had to rise again, almost from scratch. On June 27, 1949, the O'Hare family in Liverpool made headlines as Britain's largest known family, with 16 children, all under 17. The wild detail is that one home held a full line of brothers, sisters, babies, and parents that looked almost impossible to fit into a single family. A tiny circus acrobat stands on a performer's shoulders inside a grand show hall, with ornate animal cages behind them, like part of the act itself. The striking detail is how calm the child looks in a pose that turns a simple photo into a scene that feels almost unreal. In 1939, children at the Liverpool Seamen's Orphanage were photographed in a snowball fight on the snowy grounds of Hillbark in Wirral. The striking detail is that this cheerful game unfolded outside a huge mansion that served as their orphanage home. In December 1952, this Daily News front page made Christine Jorgensen one of the first transgender Americans known across the United States. The striking fact is that a former Army private from the Bronx became national news almost overnight. On November 14, 1940, the Golson Library in Cuckoo Lane was left gutted during the Coventry air raid, with whole walls torn open to the street. In one night, 20,000 reference books were lost, erasing an entire library section almost at once. On November 14, 1970, rescuers searched the wreckage after the plane carrying most of the Marshall University football team crashed in West Virginia. The disaster took 75 lives and remains the deadliest loss in United States sports history. In the late 1950s, Burton's old gas lamps were piled in Park Street as the town moved from gaslight to newer street lighting. The striking part is that objects which once lit whole streets were suddenly thrown together like scrap. These X-ray scans from the United States and Mexico border show living people hidden inside a truck, a tanker, and even a suitcase. The most shocking image is the suitcase because it reveals a human body folded into a space meant for luggage. In 1951, London crowds gathered at the Cut and Windmill Walk to watch the huge former boiler house chimney come down during post-war clearance of war-damaged buildings. Its curved fall created one of the strangest city scenes of the era. Taken in Vsevolozhsk in 1988, this photo of a broken window became famous after a dark woman-like face appeared inside the glass. The chilling detail is that the figure was noticed only after the film was developed. In October 1927, these parade riders drove an early open car past Fellows' Garage on St. Louis Street, turning an ordinary town block into a moving display of the new motor age. The striking detail is how fresh and experimental the car still looks, with thin wheels, high seats. In April 1945, newly freed prisoners at Bergen-Belsen stand in line for food after British troops entered the camp. The haunting fact is that this was one of the first images made there by life photographer George Roger, as the world was only beginning to see what had been hidden. In 1915, Canadian troops leaned from train windows in Calgary as crowds gathered to watch them leave for Europe. The striking part is how calm and ordinary the station looks, even though the men smiling from the cars were heading into the First World War. In Nanking in 1948, Henri Cartier-Bresson captured hungry civilians waiting in line for rice as China's civil war pushed the city into crisis. The unforgettable detail is the boy's stare, which turned one crowded line into one of the most powerful images of that year. In Colorado in 1915, Lewis Hine photographed beat worker children near Sterling, including 6, 8, 9, and 12-year-olds who worked from early morning to evening. The shocking part is that this line of small faces was not a school photo, but a record of child labor in the fields. In 1933, Marinus van der Lubbe stands under guard in Leipzig before trial for the Reichstag fire, a case that became a major turning point in Nazi Germany. Within days, the fire was used to suspend basic freedoms and justify the arrest of about 4,500 communist and opposition activists. A famous frontier story says this man lent a widow $1,400 to pay a debt collector, then waited outside and took the same money back from the collector. The twist made the tale unforgettable because the widow kept her home while the collector walked away with nothing. I would be very grateful if you subscribe to the channel. Every day I post interesting historical photos and short stories here that really surprise.